In the evening of January 11th, 1999, David Temple returned home with his 4-year-old son and was greeted by the most horrifying sight a person could see. His pregnant wife, Belinda Temple, was lying lifeless in their closet, with blood and brain matter scattered on the wall. David had taken his son to the park to give his wife some time to rest, but what he returned home to would forever change his life. The scene looked like a typical robbery gone wrong. The glass on the door was shattered and the door was open, but nothing was stolen. Who killed Belinda? Why was it staged to look like a robbery? And most importantly, why did her husband become the #1 suspect? David Temple met his wife Belinda Lucas while they were both students at Stephen F. Austin State University. At the time, David was a football player, and although Belinda was studying physical education, she also worked as an assistant in the football program. David and Belinda immediately hit it off, and soon a love story blossomed. After 11 months of dating, David took the bold step and asked Belinda to marry him. She said yes. The pair got married in an intimate ceremony in 1992 and decided to settle down in Katy, Texas. Belinda got a job as a teacher at Katy High School, while David worked as a coach and teacher at Elias Hastings High School, just outside of Katy. About 3 years later, their family expanded when Belinda gave birth to their son, Evan. To the outside world, Belinda and David were still very much in love and were happy in their marriage. But behind closed doors, things were not as they seemed. As time passed, the couple's close friends began to notice a change in their dynamic that didn't seem normal for a couple that was so in love. Belinda's twin sister, Brenda Lucas, first noticed that David was controlling Belinda in an unhealthy way. He also made a habit of making derogatory remarks about Belinda's body. It was obvious that after the birth of their son, Belinda was no longer appealing to David because he took every chance he got to make her feel bad about the weight she had gained. While David was doing poorly at being a husband to his wife, he was surprisingly great at being a father to their son, Evan. He had a healthy relationship with his son and didn't fail to carry out his fatherly responsibilities. David and Belinda's marriage was slowly deteriorating as David began to distance himself from his wife more and more with each passing day. However, things became worse after David attended a high school reunion where he reconnected with an ex-girlfriend. After the reunion, David developed a strange habit of staying away from home. He would visit clubs and frolic with several women while lying to his wife that he was hanging out with fellow coaches. Belinda later found out that David had been paying huge sums of money at various nightclubs. The couple's relationship was seriously deteriorating, but a ray of sunshine came when Belinda discovered she was pregnant with their second child. The pair were overjoyed, but unfortunately, Belinda would never be delivered of that baby. January 11th, 1999 began like a normal day for Belinda and David. They were at their respective jobs, and their son Evan was in a daycare center. Everything was fine until Belinda received a call from the daycare center telling her that Evan had a fever and needed to go home. Belinda dropped all she was doing, drove to the daycare, and took Evan home. When she got home, she immediately began to tend to him until about half an hour later when David returned. David had returned because Belinda needed to attend an important work meeting. Belinda left David and Evan at home and drove back to work. The meeting lasted for about a few hours. As soon as it was over, Belinda drove home, arriving sometime around 3:45 p.m. Upon arrival, David could easily see that Belinda was exhausted from the day's work and clearly needed to rest. At about 4 p.m., David decided to take Evan out of the house so that his wife could get all the rest she needed. Unfortunately, the events that would take place from here on would leave the whole town of Katy, Texas in complete shock. David and Evan spent time together at a park that was just a few minutes away from their house. After leaving the park, David drove to a grocery store to purchase a few items before driving back home with Evan. As they approached the house, David immediately noticed that something was off. The back door was open and the glass had been shattered. This only meant that someone had broken into their home. Immediately, David's paternal instincts kicked in. He took Evan across the street to a neighbor's place to ensure his safety. He also asked the neighbor to call 911 because it looked like his house had been broken into. The next line of action was to check on his pregnant wife. And so, David ran into the house only to find Belinda lying lifeless in a pool of her own blood in the master bedroom closet. It was a devastating sight, but David pulled himself together and called 911. 2 officers immediately responded to the call, but as they got to the house, they encountered an obstacle. David and Belinda's dog named Shaka was outside in the yard, and he began barking aggressively at the officers. All efforts made to get past the dog were futile until David took the canine away. Since he was the one who discovered the crime scene, David was taken to the police station for questioning. During the process, the officers noted that he was very agitated. He repeatedly asked why he had to give a statement. For someone who had just found his wife's cold body, David was more irritated than devastated. Another thing that stood out to the police was that throughout the entire process, David did not shed a single tear. When crime scene investigators got to David's house, they were shocked at the brutality Belinda had suffered. They found her lying face down on the floor with bloodstains everywhere. The detectives stated that the gunshot wound to the back of Belinda's head was not immediately identified because her long hair was covering the wound. One detective even noted that the crime scene looked like Belinda was kneeling down when she was shot because there was blood and brain matter on clothes hanging in the closet. Belinda was fully dressed in jeans, a sweater, shoes, and jewelry. This would only mean that she was preparing to go out when her attacker arrived. Unfortunately, she never got out of the house, as her life and that of her unborn child were tragically cut short. An autopsy carried out on Belinda's body revealed that the murder weapon was a 12-gauge shotgun. The investigation soon led detectives to a number of clues that made them begin to consider the possibility that the break-in had been staged. The first clues they found was that although a few drawers were hanging open, the contents of the drawers remained intact. In fact, nothing seemed to have been taken away from the house. Belinda's jewelry was not taken, neither was David's. Detectives began to form a theory that the intruder, if there was one, had no intention of stealing. They had entered the house with just one purpose: to kill Belinda. After taking a close look at the back door, which was found open with the glass shattered, detectives also noticed something abnormal. They noticed that the pattern of the shattered glass and the location of the glass shards made it look like the glass had been broken while the door was open. So, if the back door was open, why would an intruder bother shattering the glass? With these clues, detectives formed an opinion that the crime scene was indeed staged to look like a robbery by someone who had access to the house. Although the detectives were uncertain about it, David was their first suspect in the case. According to the officers who questioned David, some of the details he supplied during the questioning were inconsistent, and his behavior seemed a bit off. The pile of incriminating evidence led detectives to believe that David may have had a hand in his wife's death. A few days later, David told the detectives that he knew someone who might have had motive to kill his wife. He told them of 16-year-old Riley Sanders, who was their neighbor and a student of Caddy High School, where Belinda was a teacher. David told detectives that Riley was in one of Belinda's classes, and she had complained to his parents that he was skipping classes. A few weeks before the murder, Belinda had told Riley's parents about his continued truancy, and Riley was grounded as a result. David believed that this incident would be enough motive for Riley to kill Belinda. Based on this information, detectives looked into Riley Sanders as a suspect in the case. Surprisingly, they discovered that Riley had access to his father's 12-gauge shotgun, which was the same kind of gun used in the murder. A deeper look into Riley revealed that a number of his friends were involved in a robbery several weeks earlier. However, Riley had a concrete alibi. According to him, he had skipped school as usual and spent the rest of the day smoking with his friends. Detectives were unable to find any evidence that connected Riley to the murder, so he was removed from the list of suspects, leaving them with David as the only suspect once again. As the investigation progressed, detectives made a shocking discovery. David was having an affair with another teacher in the school where he worked. It was also revealed that David and his mistress, Heather Scott, spent New Year's Eve together. David had abandoned his pregnant wife at home to spend the holiday in Heather's house. While this discovery made it clear that David might have had a motive to murder his wife, detectives were unable to prove it due to lack of evidence. After weeks of investigation, the case slowly turned cold, and David, the prime suspect in the case, remained a free man. Belinda's family, who knew all about the troubles David and Belinda were having in their marriage, strongly believed that David was behind the murder. Unfortunately, there was no evidence to prove this belief. In June 2001, about 2 years after Belinda had been murdered, David and Heather Scott got married. David had seemingly moved on with his life and had no idea that detectives were still investigating the case. In November 2004, about 5 years after the murder, the police finally gathered enough evidence to charge David Temple for the murder of his wife. He was arrested and made to stand trial. During the trial, prosecutors argued that since David was unhappy in his marriage and had started cheating on his wife, he decided to get rid of her so he could be with his mistress. After careful deliberation, a jury convicted David of the murder and sentenced him to life in prison in November 2007. However, the world received a shocking surprise in November 2016 when the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned David's sentence. David was once again a free man. David's freedom only lasted for about 2.5 years before the case was taken back to court in July 2019. That same year, Heather Scott, who had been at David's side all these years, finally filed for a divorce. During the trial, David's defense team did their best to connect Riley Sanders to the murder, but all their attempts were futile. Sanders maintained that he was innocent, and the prosecutors continued to argue that David Temple had killed his wife. In August 2019, a jury convicted David Temple for the murder of his wife. However, the jury could not come to an agreement on the punishment to be meted out of David. A judge later declared a mistrial in the sentencing phase retrial. In April 2023, more than 3 years after David's second conviction, a new jury determined his fate. More than 24 years after the murder of Belinda Temple, David Temple was sentenced to life in prison. Belinda Temple's memory will forever live on in the hearts of her family and friends, who are all grateful that although it took more than 24 years, she finally got justice.